Imagine this. You're a judge, presiding over a normal day in court, when suddenly, the doors swing open, and in walks Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor, the man famous for his steely glare and tough guy roles. The courtroom murmurs, but the judge simply chuckles. "What brings Hollywood here today?" he jokes, expecting laughs. But then, Eastwood reaches into his jacket, pulls out a badge, and the room falls dead silent. The judge's face drains of color. This wasn't a movie. This was real. And that badge? It carried a weight no one saw coming. What was Clint Eastwood hiding? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome to Mr. Robert's Story, where we bring you the most jaw-dropping real-life moments. Today, we uncover a courtroom scene so shocking, it left everyone speechless. Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, walks into court and the judge laughs, thinking it's all a joke. But when Clint pulls out a U.S. Secret Service badge, the laughter stops instantly. What was he doing there? How did he get that badge? And why did the judge's face turn pale? Stick around, because this story will blow your mind. It was supposed to be an ordinary day in court. The judge, a respected legal figure with years on the bench, was handling a routine case. The atmosphere was as it always was, formal, structured, and filled with the usual legal jargon. Lawyers whispered to their clients, clerks shuffled paperwork, and the audience sat with a mix of boredom and curiosity. The gavel had just struck, signaling the beginning of yet another hearing. Then, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. At first, no one paid much attention. People coming in and out of court was normal. But within seconds, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. The quiet buzz of voices soon turned into a low hum of disbelief. Eyes widened, heads turned, and whispers spread like wildfire. Because the man who had just walked in wasn't just anyone. It was Clint Eastwood, the Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, the man known for playing no-nonsense lawmen, cowboys, and tough guys who didn't flinch in the face of danger. The same Clint Eastwood whose mere presence in a scene was enough to command respect. And now, here he was, standing inside a real courtroom, in real life. For a few moments, it was as if time itself had paused. People weren't sure whether to believe their eyes. Was this some kind of publicity stunt? A film shoot? A mistake? The judge, a man known for his stern and composed demeanor, looked up from his bench. At first, he simply blinked, as if trying to process what he was seeing. Then, to everyone's surprise, he chuckled. A deep, hearty laugh. "Well, well, well," the judge said, leaning back in his chair. "Hollywood's finest has decided to pay us a visit." The tension in the room broke, and scattered laughter followed. The attorneys exchanged amused glances, and even the bailiff cracked a small smile. The judge, still chuckling, tapped his gavel lightly. "Mr. Eastwood, I assume you're here to deliver one of your famous one-liners," he joked. "Or did you take a wrong turn on your way to a movie set?" The audience chuckled again. After all, Clint Eastwood walking into a courtroom out of nowhere had to be a joke. But Clint wasn't smiling. He wasn't laughing. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his eyes locked onto the judge with that same piercing intensity that had made him famous in movies like Dirty Harry and Unforgiven. The lightheartedness in the room slowly faded as people began to realize this wasn't a joke. Clint Eastwood wasn't here for entertainment. He was here for something serious. The judge's laughter slowed as he observed Clint's expression. Something about it sent a chill through the room. The man standing before them wasn't the Hollywood actor they knew from the big screen. There was something different about him, something real. The judge, still attempting to regain control of the moment, cleared his throat. "All right, Mr. Eastwood," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "To what do we owe the honor of your presence today?" The entire room leaned in. Every pair of eyes was locked onto Clint, waiting for his response. And then, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, Clint Eastwood reached into his jacket. For a split second, the entire room held its breath. It was an instinctive reaction. After all, this was Clint Eastwood, the man famous for gunfights and standoffs. It was absurd to think he'd be carrying a weapon here, but his movements carried the kind of weight that made people uneasy. Then, his hand emerged, and what he pulled out wasn't a gun. It was a badge. A gleaming, unmistakable badge. But not just any badge. A United States Secret Service badge. The effect was immediate. The judge's smirk vanished. The amused murmurs in the crowd ceased. The atmosphere in the room turned from light-hearted curiosity to pure, stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Because at that moment, one thing became clear. Clint Eastwood wasn't just some actor playing law enforcement on the big screen. He had real authority, real connections, and whatever he was here for, it wasn't a joke. For what felt like an eternity, the courtroom was silent. The gleam of the United States Secret Service badge in Clint Eastwood's hand seemed to cast a shadow over the entire room. The air had shifted. What had begun as a humorous moment now carried a weight so heavy, it was almost suffocating. The judge, who only moments ago had been laughing, now sat frozen. His eyes darted from Clint's face to the badge and back again, as if his mind was struggling to catch up with reality. The authority of the courtroom had, in an instant, shifted away from the bench and into the hands of the man standing before them. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. His voice was quieter now, careful, almost hesitant. "Mr. Eastwood, is this some kind of honorary badge? A collector's item?" He was grasping for a logical explanation, one that would allow him to regain control of the moment. Clint didn't blink. His voice, steady and deliberate, cut through the thick silence. "This is very real." A shiver ran through the room. The statement, simple as it was, carried a force behind it that no one could deny. The attorneys in the courtroom exchanged uncertain glances. The bailiff, who had been standing at ease before, now shifted his stance slightly, as if suddenly aware that he might be in the presence of someone far more powerful than he had realized. The murmurs in the crowd had vanished. No one dared to speak, let alone breathe too loudly. The judge swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I see," he said slowly. "Then, Mr. Eastwood, might I ask, what exactly brings you here today?" For the first time since entering, Clint moved. He took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the judge's bench. His boots echoed slightly against the polished floor, each step a reminder that this was no dream, no Hollywood scene. This was real. "I'm here on official business," Clint stated. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried a presence that made everyone lean in slightly. He glanced at the judge, his expression unreadable. "And I'd suggest we drop the jokes." The judge gave a slow nod, as if he had just received a reality check he hadn't been expecting. "Of course," he said quickly. "No jokes." There was something surreal about seeing Clint Eastwood, a man known for playing hardened lawmen on screen, standing here, not as an actor, but as someone with real power, real connections. The idea of him being linked to the United States Secret Service felt almost too incredible to be true. Yet here he was, holding undeniable proof in his hands. Someone in the audience finally whispered, "Wait, is he really with the Secret Service?" No one had an answer. The judge, still looking slightly pale, leaned forward, resting his hands on the bench. "Mr. Eastwood, I think we all deserve some clarity here. You say this is official business. May I ask, in what capacity are you associated with the Secret Service?" Clint took a slow breath, as if choosing his words carefully. Then, he spoke. "I've worked with federal agencies for years," he said. "I've trained with them, consulted for them. I've been involved in more than just movies." He paused, his eyes locked onto the judge's. "And I have clearance that most people in this room don't." A fresh wave of tension washed over the courtroom. People were now looking at Clint Eastwood in an entirely new light. The judge hesitated, then asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "So, are you telling us that you are actively involved with the United States Secret Service?" Clint's response was measured, but firm. "I'm telling you that I wouldn't be here if I didn't have a reason to be." No further explanation. No unnecessary details. It was classic Clint Eastwood, delivering just enough to make a point, but leaving enough unsaid to keep people guessing. The judge exhaled, rubbing his temple. He had expected a simple, routine day. Instead, he now found himself in a situation that felt like something straight out of a political thriller. "All right," the judge finally said. "I won't question the legitimacy of that badge, but I have to ask, what exactly do you need from this court today?" Clint reached into his jacket once more, but this time, he wasn't pulling out a badge. Instead, he retrieved a folded document. He walked forward, extending it toward the bailiff, who hesitated before taking it. The document was then handed to the judge, who unfolded it carefully. As his eyes scanned the paper, his expression changed yet again. Whatever was written there had an immediate impact. His fingers tightened slightly around the edges. His posture stiffened. The courtroom waited, breathless. The judge finally looked up. His voice was noticeably more serious now. "I see," he said. This changes things. What was in that document? And why did it seem to shift the entire power dynamic of the courtroom? One thing was certain, Clint Eastwood wasn't just here to make an appearance. He was here to deliver a message. And whatever that message was, it had just sent a shockwave through the entire court. The room remained silent as the judge's fingers trembled slightly over the document in his hands. He swallowed hard, scanning the pages again as if trying to process what he was reading. The once light-hearted, confident demeanor he had displayed just moments ago was now gone, replaced by something far more serious, concern, perhaps even fear. The audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between Clint Eastwood and the judge. The attorneys, normally prepared to argue and counter-argue, sat motionless, their legal pads untouched. Even the bailiff, a trained professional meant to keep order, seemed at a loss for what to do next. The judge finally exhaled, setting the document down carefully, as if it carried more weight than just paper and ink. He looked up at Clint, his eyes studying the man before him in a way that suggested he was now seeing him in a completely different light. This is classified information," the judge finally said, his voice quieter than before. "Where did you get this?" Clint Eastwood remained unfazed. His expression, still that signature mix of stoic and intense, didn't change. He merely folded his arms across his chest and replied, "I have my sources." The judge let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. "This goes beyond just a routine case. This is federal business. And yet, you're standing here in my courtroom with documents that most people in this building don't even have clearance to see." Clint didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the weight of the moment settle before finally speaking. "You're right," he said. "This isn't routine, but I needed to make sure it was handled properly." The judge narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly does properly mean in this situation, Mr. Eastwood?" For the first time, Clint took a step forward, his boots echoing slightly against the polished courtroom floor. He didn't raise his voice, but somehow, his words carried even more authority than before. "It means this case, and everything tied to it, is bigger than you think," Clint stated. "And if the wrong people get their hands on this information, it won't just be your courtroom affected, it'll be a national issue." A collective shiver seemed to pass through the room. The audience members exchanged nervous glances, trying to comprehend the gravity of what they were witnessing. A Hollywood legend standing in a real courtroom, not as an actor, but as a man who clearly had connections to the highest levels of federal power. One of the defense attorneys finally found his voice. "Wait a minute," he said, standing up. "Are you saying this case has ties to a federal investigation?" Clint turned his gaze toward the lawyer. "I'm saying it has ties to something bigger than what you see on the surface." The lawyer hesitated, but he wasn't satisfied. "With all due respect, Mr. Eastwood, I find it hard to believe that an actor, even one as respected as you, has direct involvement with federal investigations." Clint Eastwood didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out something different, a second document, smaller than the first. He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. The judge's face changed the instant he saw it. His eyes flicked back up to Clint, his jaw tightening. This is a federal clearance order," he said, barely above a whisper. The crowd gasped. A federal clearance order. That wasn't something given to just anyone. That was something reserved for individuals who had direct involvement with classified operations, people the government trusted with sensitive intelligence. The defense attorney, the one who had just challenged Clint, sat back down slowly, his face pale. The judge looked at Clint again, this time with something different in his eyes. Not just surprise, but respect. You really are connected to the Secret Service, he said, almost to himself. Clint nodded. Like I said, I don't carry that badge for show. The weight of his words hung in the air. The judge sat back in his chair, clearly struggling to grasp just how far-reaching this situation had become. All right, Mr. Eastwood, he said finally. If what you're saying is true, if this case really has federal implications, then I need to know what you want from this court. Clint's expression remained unreadable. I want full cooperation, he said simply. I want the right people informed, and I want certain details locked down before they reach the wrong hands. The judge nodded slowly, his fingers still gripping the clearance order. And if I don't comply? For the first time, a faint smirk tugged at the corner of Clint's lips. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it carried the same weight as every one of his famous movie lines. Let's just say, I wouldn't recommend that. A nervous chuckle escaped from someone in the audience, but it quickly died down when no one else dared to react. The judge exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. This is unprecedented, he admitted. But given what I'm looking at here, I don't think I have much of a choice. He straightened his shoulders and adjusted his robe. Very well. I'll do as you ask, Mr. Eastwood, but I want it on record that this is highly unusual. Clint gave a small nod. Noted. The judge glanced around the room before bringing his gavel down with a firm bang. Court is adjourned until further notice, he announced. And with that, the case, once thought to be just another routine trial, was no longer just a legal matter. It was something much bigger, something classified. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Clint Eastwood turned, slipping his badge and clearance order back into his jacket. He had made his point. The message had been delivered. And as he walked out of the courtroom, one thing was clear. Clint Eastwood wasn't just a Hollywood star. He was a man with real power, real connections, and real authority. And today, he had just proven that to everyone in the room. As Clint Eastwood walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him, the tension in the room remained thick. The murmurs that had been stifled throughout the hearing now erupted into full-blown whispers, conversations laced with confusion, disbelief, and even fear. The judge, still gripping the federal clearance order in his hands, sat motionless, his mind racing. He had handled thousands of cases in his career, but nothing had ever unfolded like this. He wasn't just dealing with a high-profile individual. He was dealing with classified information, with federal involvement, and possibly even a matter of national security. The defense attorney, who had been so quick to question Clint's involvement, leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling in stunned silence. The prosecution team huddled together, whispering among themselves. The audience, still in their seats, exchanged wide-eyed glances, struggling to piece together what had just transpired. But the most unsettled person in the room was the judge himself. Slowly, he turned to the bailiff. Close the courtroom doors. No one leaves yet. The bailiff hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping toward the entrance. The heavy wooden doors locked into place, sealing the room. The judge took a deep breath, then exhaled. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the weight of what had just unfolded. Before we continue, I need to make something very clear. The room fell dead silent. What happened here today did not happen in the way you think it did. A chill ran through the courtroom. Several people shifted in their seats. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others leaned forward, hanging on to every word. The judge lifted the document Clint had given him. This case is no longer just a legal matter. It is now part of a larger investigation, one that goes beyond this courtroom, beyond our city, and possibly even beyond our jurisdiction. He paused, then looked up at the audience. I cannot and will not discuss the details of what Mr. Eastwood presented here today. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. One of the jurors, a middle-aged man with a skeptical expression, raised a hand. Your Honor, with all due respect, we just watched one of the most famous actors in the world walk into this courtroom, flash a Secret Service badge, and shut down a trial. You're telling us we're just supposed to pretend that didn't happen? The judge's jaw tightened. He glanced at the federal clearance order again, then looked directly at the juror. That is exactly what I'm saying. The weight of his words settled over the room. No one dared to challenge him. The defense attorney cleared his throat. So what happens now? The judge placed the document inside a confidential case file and closed it carefully. Now, I follow protocol. I make the necessary calls, and I make sure this information goes exactly where it needs to go. Asterisk nowhere else. Asterisk. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. I trust that every single person in this courtroom understands the gravity of what just happened. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, the judge gave a slow nod. Court dismissed. The gavel struck once, echoing through the room. As people began to rise from their seats, the mood was nothing like a normal trial's conclusion. No one spoke casually. No one shuffled through papers or checked their phones. Instead, they filed out in eerie silence, their minds still struggling to process the event they had just witnessed. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood was already outside the courthouse. He stood at the top of the courthouse steps, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his gaze scanning the city in front of him. He could feel the weight of what had just happened, but this was nothing new to him. He had walked through these kinds of situations before, though never in such a public setting. He knew the courtroom would be in shock. He knew rumors would spread. He knew that, by the time the sun set, 100 different versions of what had just happened would be circulating through the legal community, the media, and maybe even higher levels of government. But Clint also knew one other thing. There was a reason he had shown up in that courtroom today. Because somewhere, someone had thought they could handle this case without interference. Someone had believed they could manipulate the system, keep certain information hidden, and ensure that the truth never came to light. But they had miscalculated. Because when Clint Eastwood walked into a room, whether it was a movie set, a courtroom, or a classified meeting, he always meant business. And now, the right people knew that he was watching. Taking one last look at the city skyline, Clint turned and stepped into a black car waiting at the curb. The driver didn't ask questions. He already knew not to. The doors shut behind him, and as the car pulled away from the courthouse, Clint Eastwood disappeared into the city once more, leaving behind a stunned courtroom, a shaken judge, and a case that would never be spoken about again. At least, not by those who valued their careers. The courtroom may have returned to normal, but the impact of Clint Eastwood's unexpected appearance would never be forgotten. Judges, attorneys, and even the audience had witnessed something they could barely comprehend. An actor stepping beyond the silver screen and into the world of real-life power, authority, and secrets. Was he truly connected to the Secret Service? Or was there something even deeper at play? One thing was certain, Clint Eastwood wasn't just a Hollywood icon. He was a man who commanded respect wherever he went, and today, he had left an entire courtroom speechless. And as always, he did it with style. If you enjoyed this incredible story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Robert Story. We bring you the most thrilling, jaw-dropping tales that keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update, and stay tuned for more legendary moments.